The night glittered with the kind of luxury that made people whisper in reverence. Cel Rosso was alive with music and murmurs, a symphony of clinking wine glasses and low laughter echoing beneath the chandeliers. The air carried the scent of truffle butter and espresso, and somewhere between the linen-covered tables and the gleam of polished marble, Elena Rossi moved like a shadow. Her belly brushed against the edge of the tray she balanced with both hands, swollen and heavy at 7 months. The seams of her uniform bit into her sides, but she didn't complain. She never complained, not when the shifts stretched to 16 hours. Not when the manager called her slow. Not even when the customers glanced at her belly like it was a stain on their perfect evening. Tonight was just another night she had to survive. Table 7 waved her over, the impatient snapping of manicured fingers slicing through the restaurant's hum. Valentina Russo sat there, flawless and untouchable, her dark hair cascading over a crimson dress that shimmered under the lights. She was the kind of woman who'd never worked a day in her life, the kind who believed kindness was currency meant only for the powerful. Elena had served her before. Every time Valentina made sure she remembered her place. "You're late," Valentina said, her voice a purr edged with venom. "I asked for my espresso 10 minutes ago. How hard can it be?" Elena forced a smile, the kind that made customers feel superior and safe. "I'm sorry, signora. The machine was busy. Thank you for your patience." Valentina's lips curved into something cruel. "Patience? Oh, darling, you don't belong in a place like this. They should hire people who can actually walk properly." Elena's grip tightened on the tray, the porcelain cups trembling. She turned toward the stairs that led to the next level, her heart thudding with exhaustion and the baby's restless movement. One step at a time, she told herself. One more shift and then home. The shove came out of nowhere, a sudden sharp pressure between her shoulder blades. Her breath caught in her throat. The world tilted, the tray slipped from her hands, and the crash of breaking porcelain split the air. Gasps erupted around her. Time slowed, stretching into something surreal. The marble staircase blurred beneath her as she tumbled, hip, elbow, shoulder, each impact stealing another breath. When she hit the bottom, silence followed. Pain burned through her body, radiating from her side, her leg, her abdomen. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach. "The baby! Please no!" Her voice came out broken, a whisper swallowed by the cold air. Above her, Valentina's heels clicked against the marble as she descended a few steps, frowning as if the scene had inconvenienced her. "Oh my God, she's bleeding. Someone should really clean that up," she said, her tone more annoyed than horrified. "This is why I hate cheap staff. They can't even stay on their feet." Paolo, the manager, appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale. But instead of rushing to Elena, he turned to Valentina, bowing slightly. "Signora Russo, please allow me to handle this. We'll comp your meal, of course. Please don't be upset." Elena tried to speak, to tell them she was losing too much blood, that the warm liquid pooling beneath her was life itself spilling away. Her vision blurred, the chandelier lights turning into 1,000 glittering stars. Maria, her friend, broke through the onlookers and dropped to her knees beside her. "Elena, don't move. Do you hear me? You're going to be okay. Someone call an ambulance!" But Paolo was still apologizing upward, and Valentina was still talking about ruined shoes. Elena tried to focus on Maria's face, but the edges of the world were slipping away. Every heartbeat hurt, every breath felt like drowning. Somewhere, faintly, sirens began to wail in the distance. Then the restaurant doors burst open. The sound of heavy steps echoed through the lobby. A man's voice, low and controlled, cut through the chaos like a knife. "Move!" A figure knelt beside her. A stranger in a black suit, eyes sharp, voice calm. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand steady despite the blood spreading across the marble. "Don't speak," he murmured, his tone more command than comfort. "Stay awake. Your husband is 3 minutes away." Her heart stuttered. Husband. How did he... But before she could form the thought, the darkness rushed in, soft and merciless. The last thing she heard was the stranger's voice murmuring into a phone in rapid Italian and the faint click of a gun being cocked. Nearby, the chandeliers above her blurred. One final time before the world went black. The restaurant doors flew open and the world seemed to stop breathing. The sound of polished shoes on marble echoed like gunfire. as every head turned toward the entrance. A man walked in with the kind of presence that bent the air around him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his charcoal suit tailored like armor, and his eyes dark as the edge of a storm. His name rippled through the staff in frightened whispers before anyone dared to speak it. Lorenzo Moretti. He didn't look at anyone, not the trembling hostess, not the manager babbling apologies, not even at the woman who stood at the top of the stairs still pretending to be innocent. His gaze found only one thing: the broken figure lying at the base of the stairs, the blood, the trembling hand pressed against a swollen belly. The world narrowed to that sight, and something inside him broke. He was on his knees beside her in seconds, gathering her into his arms like she was glass about to shatter. Elena, he breathed her name as if it was the only thing keeping him alive. His hand cupped her face, his voice raw with terror and rage. "I've got you, Amore, I've got you." But she barely moved her lashes, fluttering her lips, pale, her breathing shallow. Maria, the waitress who had stayed by her side, looked up, her face streaked with tears. "She fell, sir. She fell down the stairs. She's pregnant. Please do something." Lorenzo's gaze snapped upward, sharp and murderous. He didn't need to ask who was responsible. Valentina Russo stood there, her red, heels gleaming under the chandelier, her expression a mix of irritation and fear, as if she had just realized who she'd touched. He rose to his full height, still holding Elena close, and the silence that followed was the kind that crushes hope. When he spoke, his voice was low measured, but every syllable carried the weight of an execution. "Who pushed her?" The manager, Paolo, stepped forward, his hands shaking, trying to control the disaster. "Mr. Moretti, sir, it was an accident. We'll take care of the medical bills, please. There's no need to cause a scene." Lorenzo's eyes shifted toward him, and Paolo's voice died in his throat. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move a muscle, but everyone in that restaurant felt the temperature drop. Marco, his right-hand man, appeared at his shoulder as if summoned from thin air, his black suit blending into the shadows. Valentina finally spoke, her tone brittle with nervous laughter. "I didn't mean to, she was in the way. How was I supposed to know she'd fall like that?" Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something invisible cracked around him. The energy in the room shifted from fear to something deeper, colder, final. "Get my wife to the hospital," he ordered, his voice steady again but deadly quiet. "Marco, take care of this place. No police, no witnesses." As paramedics rushed in and lifted Elena onto a stretcher, Lorenzo moved beside them, never letting go of her hand. The blood on his cuff spread, but he didn't notice. Every time she stirred, his thumb brushed over her knuckles, whispering promises she could barely hear. Outside the restaurant, black cars were already waiting, their engines humming. The city lights glimmered against the windows, but inside, the car there was only the sound of her breathing and his steady voice, repeating, "Stay with me. Amore, stay with me. At St. Catherine's, the hospital staff moved like soldiers under orders. The 4th floor was cleared in minutes, doctors appearing as if from nowhere. A silver-haired surgeon stepped forward and said she needs immediate stabilization, possible placental separation. Lorenzo's hand tightened on hers. "You will save them both," he said, and it wasn't a request. When they wheeled her away, he stood frozen in the hallway. His jaw clenched, his tie loosened, his mind already sharpening to vengeance. Marco arrived moments later, phone in hand, eyes dark with understanding. "The woman's name is Valentina Russo, daughter of Dante Russo, minor real estate family, spoiled, entitled, connected to the Vitali brothers." Lorenzo looked at him and spoke so softly that Marco leaned in to hear. "I want her father's assets frozen by morning. I want every account traced, every property investigated, every secret revealed. But first I want her to feel fear." Marco nodded, already dialing numbers. "What about the restaurant, boss?" "Burn it." Lorenzo's gaze turned back to the hospital doors where they had taken his wife and his unborn child. The lights above flickered once, and he whispered under his breath a promise meant only for himself. "If she doesn't survive, no one in this city will." The steady rhythm of machines filled the hospital room, the sound of life balanced on fragile wires and blinking lights. Elena drifted between darkness and light, her mind trying to escape the pain that chained her to consciousness. Each breath felt like a war, her body heavy, her thoughts scattered. Somewhere beyond the haze, she heard his voice, deep, low, trembling, with something she had never heard before, fear. Lorenzo sat beside her bed, his hand gripping hers as if letting go would kill him. His suit jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, blood still staining the cuff where he had held her. He had not moved since the surgery, not when the doctors whispered about internal bleeding, not when Marco had come to update him about the city. He had only stared at her pale face, waiting for her to open her eyes. When she finally did, the world came back slowly, the dim glow of monitors, the faint scent of antiseptic, the shadow of Lorenzo's face inches from hers. His eyes looked different now, darker, softer, and filled with something dangerous. "You're awake," he whispered, his voice breaking. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "The baby?" she asked, her voice no louder than a breath. His hand covered hers, pressing it gently to her stomach. "She's fighting," he said. "Our daughter's strong just like you." Tears welled in her eyes, but before she could speak, the door opened. Marco entered, quiet, deliberate, carrying a folder that looked out of place among the sterile walls. He glanced at Elena, then at Lorenzo. "We found her boss, Valentina Russo." The air in the room changed again. Lorenzo stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor like a blade unsheathed. "Where?" Marco hesitated, watching Elena's weak form on the bed. "She's at her father's penthouse under guard. Dante's calling in favors with the police, trying to make it look like an accident." Lorenzo's expression didn't move, but something behind his eyes turned cold enough to freeze blood. "Get my car ready," he said. Marco frowned. "Boss, the doctor said she's not out of danger yet." Lorenzo turned his head just enough to look at him, and that was enough. Marco nodded silently and left. Elena's hand reached for him, weak, trembling. "Lorenzo, please don't leave." His gaze softened, the storm in his eyes dimming for a moment. "I'll come back," he said, "I swear it." But she shook her head. No strength in her body, yet her voice carried desperation. "Promise me you won't do anything you'll regret." He leaned closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "Everything I do for you," he whispered. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him like the end of a prayer. Outside the hospital, his men waited, black cars lined up under the pale streetlights. Marco opened the door as Lorenzo slid inside, his voice calm, deadly. "No noise, no bodies on the news, no loose ends. I want the world to wake up tomorrow, knowing what happens when someone touches my family." In the penthouse, Valentina was pouring herself a drink, her hands shaking, though she tried to hide it. The television played softly in the background, a news anchor mentioning a shooting downtown, the details unconfirmed. She told herself it wasn't connected, it couldn't be. Then the lights flickered. From the shadows, a man stepped. Forward suit, immaculate eyes, unreadable. Marco. He didn't speak, just tilted his head once toward the balcony where another figure stood, his back to the skyline. Lorenzo Valentina's. Glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Lorenzo turned slowly, his expression calm, too calm. "Do you know what happens when you hurt someone I love?" he asked. She backed away, stammering. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to. She was in my way, I swear." He stepped closer, each word quiet, deliberate, heavy as gunfire. "You pushed my wife. You made her bleed. You made my daughter bleed. And now you'll understand what that costs." She fell to her knees, trembling. "Please, I didn't know she was yours. I didn't know." Lorenzo crouched to her level, his voice almost tender. "That's the problem, Valentina. You never know until it's too late." As the lights of the city burned. Behind him, Marco closed the balcony doors, shutting out the noise of the world. At EC. The hospital. Elena woke in the dark, her hand reaching instinctively for the space where Lorenzo had been. Her body hurt, her heart ached, but deeper than that was something colder, something she couldn't name yet. Outside her window, thunder rolled over the city, and she whispered to herself a truth that felt like a confession. "My husband is not just a man. He's the storm, and someone just gave him a reason to destroy." The morning after the storm was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting for the next heartbeat to shatter it. Elena woke to the faint hum of the hospital machines and the hollow ache where Lorenzo should have been sitting. The chair beside her bed was empty, his jacket draped over the armrest, the scent of his cologne lingering like a ghost. Her hand reached instinctively toward the space he had filled and found only air, cold and heavy with absence. The nurse entered with a soft smile, trying to pretend everything was normal, but Elena saw the tremor in her hands the way she avoided eye contact. "Where is my husband?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the door before answering his out, taking care of some family matters, Mrs. Moretti. Family matters. The words tasted like metal. Outside the hospital, the air was thick with rumors. The Russo name had disappeared from social calendars, business circles, and society pages overnight. Dante Russo's penthouse was locked down by investigators, the news whispering about financial crimes, tax fraud, bribery. But no one mentioned the blood on the balcony. Floor no one dared. Lorenzo sat in his car, parked across from the building, his reflection ghost-like in the tinted glass. Marco sat beside him, phone pressed to his ear, whispering updates from a dozen men scattered across the city. It's done, boss. The accounts are frozen, the properties seized, even the offshore ones. Valentina tried to leave the city last night using her father's jet, but the flight was denied clearance. She's stranded. Lorenzo's eyes didn't leave the skyline. Let her run, he said. Let her feel hunted. Let her realize what it's like to fall with no one left to catch her. At the hospital, Elena shifted restlessly, her body aching from stillness, her heart pounding with unease. Maria visited her, bringing flowers and trembling hands. He hasn't been back since last night, Maria said gently, her voice thick with worry. You know what he's doing, don't you? Elena turned away, staring out the window where the sun painted the city gold. I think he's finishing something that began when I fell. By noon, the news cycle erupted again. Dante Russo had called a press conference, his face ashen behind the cameras as he announced that his daughter Valentina was no longer part of the Russo family. He spoke the words with the stiffness of a man who had been given no choice. As of today, he declared, Valentina Russo does not represent our name or our interests. May God forgive her for what she's done. Elena watched from her hospital bed, the screen flickering, the camera zooming in on Dante's shaking hands. She felt no satisfaction, only a deep ache where pity used to live. Her phone buzzed once, and when she looked, there was a message with no sender, no name. She'll never touch you again. Rest. L. She pressed the phone to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks because she knew what that meant. Lorenzo hadn't just ruined Valentina's life. He had ended it in a way that didn't require blood, just silence. Night fell heavy over the city. The sky burned orange, then deepened to black. In a small apartment across town, Valentina sat on the floor, surrounded by unopened suitcases. Her cards declined, her phone dead, her friends gone. Every call to her father went unanswered. She turned on the TV, desperate for noise, and froze when she saw her own face flashing across the screen under the words socialite under investigation. Then there was a knock at the door. She rose slowly, her heart pounding. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a black suit holding a phone to his ear. She couldn't see his eyes, but something about his stillness made her stomach twist. Who is it? She asked, her voice shaking. The man didn't answer, he simply placed a card against the glass. It was black with a single symbol embossed in gold, a rose wrapped in thorns. The mark of the Moretti family. Valentina stumbled back, whispering, "No, no, no," as the door handle turned once softly. She screamed, and the lights flickered, and somewhere far above the city, Lorenzo Moretti looked out from his balcony, lighting a cigarette, the glow flaring briefly against the night. Marco approached from the shadows, his tone low-controlled. "It's done, boss." Lorenzo didn't look at him, just exhaled smoke into the wind. "Tell the men to stand down. We're finished here." Back at the hospital, Elena woke from a restless sleep, her pulse racing as if her heart knew something had shifted. The city outside her window looked different, cleaner, quieter, and more dangerous. She closed her eyes, pressing her hand to her belly, and whispered, to the child growing inside her, a promise, half prayer, half warning. "Your father has built you a kingdom, little one, but it's made of fire and shadows, and one day you'll have to decide whether to rule it or burn it down." The rain had not stopped for 3 days, the city washed clean of its noise and sin, but still heavy with secrets. From her hospital window, Elena watched the gray sky blur into the horizon and felt like the world had forgotten how to breathe. Dr. Reeves came in every few hours, checking her vitals, murmuring that the baby was strong, that she was healing well, but none of it reached her. What she really wanted was to see Lorenzo's face, to hear his voice, and to know if the storm outside was the same one burning through him. When he finally appeared, he did not look like the man she had married. His hair was damp, his tie gone, the cuffs of his white shirt stained from rain, and something darker. He stood in the doorway, silent for a long moment, watching her as if memorizing that she was still there. She whispered his name, and it broke him from whatever thoughts were clawing at his mind. He crossed the room and knelt beside her bed, his hand finding hers the roughness of his palm, a reminder that he lived in a world where tenderness was a weapon easily lost. "You should have stayed away," he said softly, brushing her hair from her forehead. "You should never have been part of this world." She smiled faintly, her voice barely a whisper. "You're my world, Lorenzo. I married you because I loved you, not because I understood you. Now I think I'm beginning to." His gaze darkened, but there was something fragile in it, something almost human. He stayed until night fell, the lights of the city flickering below like scattered fireflies. Then came the knock. Marco entered, his expression grim, his movements deliberate. "Boss, we have a problem." Lorenzo rose slowly, the air shifting again, the warmth draining from the room. "Speak." Marco hesitated, glancing at Elena before saying the words that made the machines beside her hum louder. "Dante Russo is gone." "Gone how?" Lorenzo's tone was calm, but Elena could feel the violence behind it like a coiled spring. "His car exploded an hour ago on the East Pier," Marco said. "We found pieces, but no driver, no witnesses. Someone made it look like your work." Lorenzo's jaw tightened, his mind already calculating. They're trying to start a war. He turned to Elena, his voice soft again, but threaded with command. "I'm moving you home tonight. It's safer there." She wanted to protest, but something in his eyes stopped her. The ambulance came disguised as a transport van, and by midnight she was being wheeled through the gates of a house that looked more like a palace than a home. The Moretti estate stretched into the mist gardens lined with stone fountains, armed guards at every corner. The air smelled of roses and rain and danger. Inside, chandeliers glowed against cream marble floors, and portraits of stern-faced men lined the walls. Lorenzo guided her through the grand foyer, his arm around her waist, steady, protective. "This is where you live," she whispered, awe and unease tangling in her chest. His answer came without hesitation. "This is where we live now. You'll never be unprotected again." A woman in her 50s appeared graceful and severe in a gray dress. Agnes, head of the household, bowed slightly. "Welcome home, Mrs. Moretti. The East Wing has been prepared for you and all medical equipment installed per Dr. Reeves' orders." The room they brought her to took her breath away. A canopy bed dressed in cream silk, soft light filtering through tall windows, and in one corner, a white crib already waiting as if their daughter had been expected by the walls themselves. Lorenzo watched her reaction, his voice low. "I know it's not the life you wanted, but it's the only way I can keep you safe." She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "What about the life we had before, the one where we were just us?" He took her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheeks like he could memorize her fear. "That life died on those stairs," he said quietly. "But I swear I'll build you a new one, piece by piece, until you can breathe again." Outside, thunder rumbled across the hills. Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression colder than before. "Boss, you need to see this." He handed Lorenzo a tablet screen, glowing with headlines. "Police find ties between Moretti family and Russo. Explosion, anonymous sources claim retaliation imminent." Lorenzo's jaw clenched, his voice dropping to something that could freeze glass. "They want a war. They'll get one. But first, no one touches my wife, not while I live." Later that night, when the rain softened, Elena woke to find him standing by the window, cigarette smoke curling around his silhouette. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, a man carved from shadow and regret. She whispered his name, and he turned eyes softer now as he came to her side and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sleep, amore," he murmured. "Tomorrow everything changes." She didn't know if he meant for them or for the city, but as she drifted into uneasy dreams, the thunder rolled again, like the sound of an empire beginning to wake. The morning light spilled across the Moretti estate, turning the gardens into a blur of gold and shadow. But the peace was only an illusion. The moment Lorenzo stepped into his office, the calm shattered. Reports waited on his desk, thick folders filled with photographs, names and numbers all leading back to one truth. Someone inside his circle had betrayed him. Elena sat by the window, wrapped in a silk robe, watching from a distance, as guards moved through the courtyard like ghosts. Every hour she saw more of them arriving, black cars gliding through the gates like a silent army. She could feel it in her bones, the quiet before something violent. Agnes appeared at her door carrying tea, her voice gentle but eyes sharp. "Your husband hasn't slept, Mrs. Moretti. The men say the Vitali brothers are stirring trouble again." Elena nodded quietly, her fingers tightening around the cup. She had seen that name before in one of Lorenzo's papers, and the weight of it settled like cold iron in her chest. Downstairs, Lorenzo met Marco. His tone clipped, his patience gone. They planted the explosives in Russo's car, but not for him. Marco said they wanted it to look like your revenge. They wanted to ignite every family in the city. Lorenzo leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Then it's time to remind them what real fear looks like." He moved through his men with precision, assigning orders as though he were conducting an orchestra of chaos. But when he stepped into the hallway and saw Elena at the top of the stairs, everything inside him softened. She walked down slowly, her hands resting over her belly, the morning light painting her face in pale gold. "You're planning something," she said quietly. He didn't answer, only met her gaze. "You can't protect me from everything, Lorenzo." Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to make him pause. "Every time you strike back, they will find new ways to hurt us. You think building walls will save us, but all you're doing is building a prison." He closed the distance between them, the tension thick enough to cut. "I'm not building a prison. I'm building a fortress, and you're the reason it exists." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "Then let me be more than that. Don't lock me away while you destroy yourself." Her words hit deeper than any bullet ever could. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering, "You married a monster, amore, now you have to let me be one." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She wandered the east wing, listening to the rain against the windows until she found herself outside a locked door. Voices came from the other side, Marco's low and cautious, Lorenzo's sharper, colder. "We caught one of the men, boss. He's talking, he says he's been feeding information to Vitali." Lorenzo's voice was like a blade. "Where is he?" "In the cellar." Elena stepped back, heart pounding. She shouldn't hear more, but she couldn't move away. The footsteps came next, boots against marble, then silence. She followed them through the corridor, the curiosity stronger than fear, until she reached the back staircase. It led to the basement, dimly lit and humming with tension. From the shadows, she saw him, Lorenzo, standing in front of a man tied to a chair, blood on the floor around him. The sight froze her breath. The man begged in Italian voice, hoarse with terror. "I had no choice. They threatened my family, please." Lorenzo's voice was almost gentle. "And now your family will know what your choice cost." Elena couldn't watch, but she couldn't look away either. The man screamed, the sound muffled, then ended, abruptly leaving only silence and the steady rhythm of Lorenzo's breathing. When he turned, she was gone back up the stairs, hand pressed to her stomach, tears blurring her vision. She collapsed onto the bed, shaking not just from horror, but from the realization that she still loved him, even after seeing what he truly was. Later, when he entered their room, his hands washed clean, his eyes dark, she pretended to be asleep. He stood over her for a long time, his shadow stretching across the wall. He knew she had seen, he could feel it in the distance between them. But instead of anger, there was something like sorrow in his voice when he finally spoke. "I warned you not to look too close, Elena, because once you see me, you can never unsee me." He turned away, walking to the window where the rain still fell harder than before. Behind him, Elena whispered into the darkness, a truth she could no longer deny. "You're not the monster I'm afraid of, Lorenzo. You're the monster I can't live without." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky again, and far beyond the estate lights flared over the city as the first shots of another war echoed through the night. The night the war began, the city didn't sleep. Gunfire echoed from the docks to the hills, and the sky burned with orange light. The Moretti mansion stood like a fortress under siege shadows moving against the walls, guards shouting orders into radios, the air thick with the smell of smoke and rain. Inside the house, the air pulsed with tension, every sound sharper, every silence louder. Elena sat in the nursery holding her swollen belly, her fingers trembling as she hummed softly to calm the baby inside her. The lullaby her mother once sang felt thin fragile against the chaos outside. The door burst open and Marco appeared, his face pale, his voice urgent. "Mrs. Moretti, we have to move now. They breached the outer gate." Her heart stopped. "Where is Lorenzo?" Marco's jaw tightened. "He's in the east wing leading the defense. We don't have much time." The guards surrounded her, guiding her down the hallway, their boots echoing on the marble floor. The chandeliers shook from distant explosions, dust falling like snow. Elena's breath came faster. The baby shifted inside her as if sensing danger. They turned a corner just as gunfire erupted behind them. Marco shoved her into a hidden passage, pressing a code into the wall. "Go," he barked, his eyes scanning the shadows. She hesitated, panic rising. "Come with us," he shook his head. "Someone has to cover you. Go now." The steel door slid shut behind her, muffling the sound of battle. The tunnel was narrow, dimly lit by flickering bulbs leading to the old wine cellar beneath the estate. The air was cold, damp, thick with fear. She moved slowly, her hand trailing against the stone until she reached the reinforced door at the end. The guards opened it quickly and ushered her inside. The room was lined with old barrels and security screens showing the estate above them. Elena froze when she saw the monitors. The east wing was on fire, and in the middle of the chaos, Lorenzo was fighting. He moved with terrifying precision, his black coat whipping through the smoke bullets sparking against marble walls. Every motion was calculated, every strike lethal. He wasn't the man she had married. He was something else entirely, a shadow of power and vengeance. She pressed a hand to the glass, whispering his name, but the noise swallowed her voice. On the screen, she saw Marco fall hit in the shoulder, dragged away by two men. Then another explosion rocked the east wall, the screen flickering before going black. One of the guards turned toward her. "Mrs. Moretti, we have to evacuate. The city isn't safe." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, we're not leaving without him." Above them, the thunder of gunfire faded, replaced by silence that was somehow worse. The radio crackled to life, a voice barely audible. "Boss is alive, repeat, the boss is alive, he's heading your way." Relief flooded her body so fast it made her dizzy. She sank to her knees, whispering, "Thank you," over and over. Minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. The guards' tensed guns raised, but when the door swung open, it wasn't Lorenzo. It was a man she had never seen before, tall with a scar running across his cheek, wearing the colors of the Vitali family. He smiled cold and cruel. "The king's busy upstairs," he said softly, "so he sent us for the queen." Before anyone could react, the lights went out, gunfire erupted, the room filling with smoke. Elena dropped to the floor, crawling behind a barrel, her heart pounding so hard it drowned the noise. She could hear the screams, the thud of bodies, the metallic scent of blood filling the air. A shadow loomed over her, a hand reaching out, grabbing her arm, rough and unrelenting. She screamed, kicking, struggling, until a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Touch her, and you die." The smoke parted enough for her to see him. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, covered in ash and blood, his eyes burning with fury. The man holding her turned just in time to see the flash of the gun before collapsing to the floor. Lorenzo crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered, his voice raw, his chest heaving. "You're safe now." She clung to him, sobbing against his neck as the guard secured the cellar again. But when he pulled back, his eyes were distant, his mind already elsewhere. "This was just a warning," he said softly. "They know where we live now. They won't stop until one of us is dead." Elena cupped his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Then let it be the last war, Lorenzo. No more blood, no more fear." He looked at her for a long moment, the weight of his choices pressing down like chains. He kissed her forehead, whispering a promise that sounded more like a confession. "I'll end this for you, even if it ends me." Outside, lightning split the sky and the rain began to fall harder, washing the blood from the stone steps as the Moretti Empire prepared for the fight that would decide. everything love life in the future. They had yet to hold in their arms. The rain turned to mist by morning, cloaking the estate in a haze that looked almost peaceful, but underneath the quiet, the city was bleeding. Reports came in one after another of ambushes, betrayals, and men vanishing before sunrise. Every rival family smelled weakness in the air. Yet none of them knew that. Lorenzo Moretti was no longer hiding behind walls he was preparing to strike. Elena woke to find him gone again. His side of the bed cold, the imprint of his body fading. Her body was still sore from the night before, her nerves frayed from sleeplessness. But fear had turned into something else now, resolve. She rose slowly and made her way to the window, watching the courtyard below, where black cars rolled out one by one into the fog. Agnes entered with breakfast, her face grave. "He's going to end it today, Mrs. Moretti," she said quietly. "They say he's called every capo, every ally, every man who still owes him loyalty. The table will meet at the docks tonight." Elena turned her gaze from the window, her voice steady. "And if they refuse peace?" Agnes hesitated. "Then there will be no city left by morning." Downstairs, Lorenzo stood in his office, surrounded by maps and photographs, the names of every family etched in red. Marco stood beside him, his arm in a sling, his face pale but determined. The Vitali brothers struck again at dawn. Lorenzo said, his voice calm but lethal. "They hit the hospital trying to take out Dr. Reeves." Elena's Dr. Marco nodded grimly. "We stopped them before they reached him, but they left a message carved into the wall." He handed Lorenzo a photo, a single phrase scrawled in blood. "An eye for an eye, a son for a daughter." Lorenzo stared at it for a long time, the words sinking deep until he crushed the photo in his hand. "Get the cars ready. If they want my blood, they'll have to earn it." Elena found him moments later at the front door, the storm already gathering behind his eyes. She stepped in front of him, blocking his path, her voice trembling but fierce. "Don't do this. You think ending them will bring peace, but all it will do is bury you deeper." He looked at her, the tension in him unraveling for a heartbeat. "They came for you, they came for our child. What kind of man would I be if I did nothing?" She reached out, touching his chest where his heart beat wild and unsteady. "Be the man who chooses us, not the war." For a moment, it looked like she might have reached him, but then Marco appeared, holding out a phone. "It's starting, boss." Lorenzo took it, his expression closing like a door. He pressed a kiss to Elena's forehead, his voice low. "If I don't come back, remember I loved you more than I loved this empire." When he left the mansion, the air itself seemed to follow him out like gravity bending around his will. The meeting place was an abandoned shipyard at the edge of the city, the fog rolling off the water, heavy with the scent of oil and gunpowder. The docks were lined with headlights and men carrying weapons under their coats. The Vitali brothers stood waiting in the center, their smiles sharp, their eyes colder than the steel around them. "So the great Lorenzo Moretti finally crawls out of his palace," one of them sneered. Lorenzo stepped forward, his hands bare, no weapon in sight. "I didn't come to talk about peace. I came to remind you why you used to fear me." The air thickened, the silence electric. Then the first shot rang out. Back at the mansion, Elena sat in the nursery, unable to tear her eyes from the window. Every sound from outside made her flinch, every flash of lightning looked like gunfire. Hours passed and no word came. When the phone finally rang, she snatched it up with shaking hands. A voice she didn't recognize spoke on the other end, cold and smooth. "Mrs. Moretti, your husband is alive, but he's made a trade." Her heart dropped. "What trade?" "He gave himself up to end the war," the voice said. "The Vitali brothers are dead, but their allies want proof of peace. He's gone to deliver it himself." The line went dead before she could speak. The rain outside turned violent, pounding against the glass as if the sky itself was breaking. She clutched her belly, whispering his name over and over like a prayer that refused to end. Miles away, Lorenzo stood on a bridge overlooking the city, his coat soaked through his hands, covered in the evidence of everything he had done. Behind him, sirens wailed in the distance, the sound of a city bleeding back into silence. Marco arrived breathless, his voice strained. "Boss, we need to leave now before they regroup." Lorenzo didn't move, his eyes fixed on the horizon where dawn was beginning to break. "No," he said quietly, "not yet. Let them think I'm dead. It's the only way she and the baby will ever be safe." He handed Marco a sealed envelope marked only with her name. "When she reads this, you tell her I kept my promise. You tell her the war is over." The fog swallowed them both, and by sunrise only the wind remained, carrying whispers of the man who had ruled the city and vanished like a ghost, leaving behind an empire built on love, blood, and silence. The storm did not end, it only changed shape. By nightfall, the city was quiet again, but it was the kind of quiet that comes after too much blood has been spilled. The news spoke of mysterious explosions, abandoned cars, and unclaimed bodies found by the docks. No one mentioned Lorenzo Moretti. It was as if he had been erased from the world. Inside the mansion, Elena moved through the empty halls like a ghost, her steps soft against the marble, her eyes swollen from crying. Every corner of the house reminded her of him, the scent of his cologne, the sound of his voice echoing in her memory. The guards said nothing. They only lowered their heads when she passed and tightened their grips on their weapons, as if waiting for something to happen. She refused to believe he was gone. The envelope Marco had delivered was still clutched in her hand, unopened, her name written in his unmistakable handwriting. She stared at it for hours, afraid that opening it would make his death real. Finally, just before dawn, she tore it open. Inside was a single letter written in the same precise strokes she had seen on business documents and love notes alike. My Elena, if you are reading this, it means I have done what I promised. The war is over. The Vitali brothers are gone, and the city is ours again. But I am gone too, at least in the eyes of the world. I did this to give you and our daughter a life untouched by my name. You are free now. Please don't look for me. If fate is kind, we'll meet again in another life. Until then, remember you were the only good thing I ever did. L. Her tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink, but she read it again and again, until the words were burned into her mind. The next morning, she gathered her strength dressed in black and told Marco to prepare the car. We're going to find him, she said. Marco tried to protest, but one look at her face silenced him. They drove through the outskirts of the city, past warehouses and half-burned buildings, until they reached the old shipyard where the war had ended. The smell of smoke still lingered. She stepped out into the cold wind, her eyes scanning the docks. There were tire marks, bullet shells, and blood on the concrete, but no sign of Lorenzo. Marco handed her a lighter and pointed to the water. Look, floating. Near the pier was his coat, the same black one he had worn that night. She collapsed to her knees, clutching it to her chest as if she could pull him back through sheer will. Marco's voice was quiet behind her. He wanted you safe. He made them believe he was dead. If he's alive, he'll stay hidden. Elena's voice broke. And if he's not? Marco looked away, unable to answer. Weeks passed. The Moretti Empire began to rebuild, but Elena refused to step into the role of queen. She spent her days in the nursery and her nights staring at the horizon. The baby kicked stronger now, a reminder that part of him still lived inside her. Agnes often found her whispering to her unborn child, telling stories of a man with fire in his eyes and a heart he tried to hide. Then one evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, a letter arrived without a stamp, without a seal. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but inside was a single photograph. It showed a man sitting on a bench overlooking the sea, his back turned to the camera. Even from that angle, she knew it was him. The caption beneath it read, Sicily 2 weeks ago. Her pulse quickened, her breath catching in her throat. She looked out the window toward the endless sky and whispered a vow that tasted like both hope and danger. If he is alive, I will find him. Far away on a sun-drenched island, Lorenzo sat on that same bench staring at the water. A scar ran down his arm, his face older, harder, but his eyes still carried the same storm. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small ultrasound photo worn from being folded too many times. He smiled faintly, his voice barely a whisper against the sea breeze. I told you I'd give you peace, amore, but I never said I'd stop watching over you. Behind him in the distance, a black car approached slowly, dust rising from the road, and for the first time in months his heart began to beat faster, because somehow he already knew who was coming. The air in Sicily carried the scent of salt and oranges, the kind of scent that whispered peace to anyone who wanted to forget. But Lorenzo Moretti had never learned how to forget. Every morning he walked the same path along the cliffs, a ghost among fishermen and tourists who never knew who he really was. His hands bore the faint scars of a man who had buried his past, yet every step he took was haunted by the memory of the woman he left behind. He thought he had made the right choice. He thought leaving Elena would save her. But the nights were long, and silence had a cruel way of reminding him that peace meant nothing without her voice to fill it. He still carried her letter folded against his chest, the ink worn by his touch. One evening, as the sun sank behind the water, He felt it, the shift in the wind that always came before something he couldn't name. A car pulled up along the dirt road behind him, the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. He didn't turn. At first, he only listened to the engine cut off the door open, the faint sound of footsteps on stone. Then he heard her voice, soft, trembling, alive. "You told me not to look for you," he said. "But I did." He turned slowly, and there she was, Elena. Dressed in a simple white dress, the fabric brushing against the curve of her stomach, her hair loose from the wind, her eyes full of tears and fire all at once. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the world narrowing to the space between them. Then she walked forward, her hand rising as if afraid he might disappear. "I buried you," she whispered. "They said you were gone. I saw your coat. I saw your blood." He caught her hand, pressing it to his chest, where his heartbeat thundered beneath her palm. "You should have let me stay dead," he said, his voice breaking. "It was safer that way." Her tears fell fast, her voice trembling with anger and love. "Safer for who, Lorenzo? For me or for you? Because I didn't need safety. I needed you." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in months, he let himself breathe. The storm inside him stilled her heartbeat against his chest, the only sound that mattered. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough but honest. "I thought leaving would free you from this world." She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "You were wrong. You are my world, and so is she." He froze, staring at her belly, the words sinking in. "It's a girl," she said, smiling through tears. "I named her Isabella Rose." His eyes filled with something she had never seen before, not fear, not pride, but awe. He knelt before her, pressing his forehead to her stomach, his voice barely a whisper. "My daughter, my little queen." The moment was fragile, sacred, but it didn't last. From the distance came the sound of another car, the low growl of an engine, too familiar, too deliberate. Elena stiffened, but Lorenzo's hand found hers, steady and strong. "They followed us," he said quietly. She looked at him, panic flickering in her eyes. "Who?" "The remnants of the Vitali alliance," he answered. "The ones who never accepted peace." He led her toward the stone cottage where he had been hiding, pulling a gun from under his jacket, the weight of it natural in his hand. Elena stopped him, her voice sharp. "You promised no more blood, Lorenzo." He looked at her, the faintest smile on his lips. "Then pray they listen." The car stopped outside, 3 men stepping into the fading sunlight, their suits dark, their expressions colder than the sea. One called out, his voice mocking, "The ghost of Lorenzo Moretti lives after all." Lorenzo stepped forward, shielding Elena behind him. "You came a long way to die," he said. The standoff lasted seconds, the air charged with danger, until a single gunshot split the silence. The first man fell. The others scattered, firing wildly, as Lorenzo pulled Elena into cover. The fight was fast, brutal, and silent. When it ended, only the wind moved again. Lorenzo stood bleeding from his shoulder, but alive, the men who came for him gone. Elena ran to him, pressing her hands to the wound, tears streaming down her face. "You can't keep doing this," she whispered. He smiled faintly, his hand covering hers. "I can't keep losing you either." They left that night under the cover of darkness, driving away from the coast toward the mountains where no one knew their names. Months passed quietly until spring arrived and the world softened. Their daughter was born on a morning painted in sunlight, her first cry filling the small house like music. Lorenzo held her close, whispering the same words he once said to Elena. "You're safe now, amor." Years later, people would still whisper about the man who vanished, the boss who walked away from blood and built a life no one could touch. In the quiet hills of Sicily, a little girl ran through an olive grove, her laughter echoing against the wind while her mother watched from the porch and her father sat nearby, carving a wooden toy with scarred hands that had finally learned peace. Elena looked at him, her heart full, her voice soft. "Do you ever miss the city?" Lorenzo's eyes followed their daughter dancing in the sunlight. "Not anymore," he said. "I found something better than power. I found home." And as the sun dipped behind the trees, the world around them turned golden. The war at last, a memory, and love, the only empire that remained.